It was one of those relentlessly hot July afternoons in rural Ohio, the kind that made the air shimmer and the sweat cling to the back of your neck. Birds called lazily from the tall oak trees lining the Reynolds' quiet cul-de-sac, and the occasional hum of a lawnmower punctuated the otherwise still, suburban calm. Inside the Reynolds' small, sun-faded home, the faint aroma of cinnamon toast mingled with the earthy scent of freshly watered grass. But nothing about the serenity of that summer day prepared the neighborhood for the chaos that was about to unfold. Emma Reynolds, just 3 years old, had been playing outside in her bright yellow sundress. Her tiny sandals slapped softly against the sidewalk as she kicked her ball toward the curb, giggling at the way the sun made it gleam like gold. Her curly hair bounced with each step, and the faintest freckles danced across her nose. She had been waving at a passing car, a neighbor she had known all her life, when suddenly she was gone. Her mother, Leila Reynolds, had only turned her back for a few seconds to hang a wet towel. When she turned back, the yard was empty. Panic ignited instantly. Heart hammering in her chest, she called Emma's name, first softly, then louder and more desperate, her voice cracking in the July heat. She ran across the yard, scanning the edges of the lawn, checking the driveway, even looking under the swing set where Emma sometimes hid during play. But her little girl was nowhere to be found. The neighbors, initially curious, quickly joined the search. Shouts echoed through the cul-de-sac. "Emma! Emma!" Someone called the police. Sirens wailed within minutes, lights flashing violently, painting the street in alternating red and blue. Officer cars screeched to a halt, deputies poured from their vehicles. Everyone was moving, shouting, questioning, looking for any clue. The panic was a living thing, twisting through the community like a storm. Detective Marcus Lane was assigned to the case. A veteran of missing child investigations, he was used to urgency, but the gut-wrenching fear in Leila Reynolds' eyes was something he had never seen so raw. Her hands trembled uncontrollably as she described the last time she had seen her daughter. "She was just playing with her ball," Leila stammered, voice barely audible. I turned for a moment and she was gone, just gone." Her husband, David Reynolds, stood silently beside her, jaw clenched, staring at the yard as if sheer willpower could make Emma reappear. Lane took in the scene with methodical precision. The yard itself offered little, footprints too small and faint to follow, disturbed grass showing signs of a scuffle, a bright yellow ball lying abandoned near the curb. Lane's gut told him time was crucial. "We have maybe an hour," he muttered to his partner, Officer Kim Ortiz. "After that, the trail starts to vanish." Neighbors recounted what they had seen. One elderly man mentioned a strange car parked near the edge of the woods behind the Reynolds home. It had been dark-colored, too long for a sedan, the kind of vehicle that didn't belong in a suburban neighborhood. By the time the police arrived, it was gone. Another neighbor, an older woman with keen eyes, said she had heard a low, muffled voice, almost a whisper, but she couldn't tell if it was a child or adult. The detectives moved quickly, coordinating a search grid that stretched from the cul-de-sac into the neighboring woods. Drones were deployed, scanning the fields, their cameras transmitting live feedback to the command van. Every minute was agony. Every second without finding Emma felt like a lifetime. Lane's phone rang constantly, tips, rumors, frantic cries, but he filtered through them with the patience of someone who knew that one misstep could cost a child's life. Hours passed, but the sense of urgency didn't fade. Emma's toys, her clothes, her small backpack were photographed, cataloged, and bagged for evidence. Forensic teams combed the yard, searching for anything that could indicate the abductor's identity or path. Lane's eyes kept returning to the sidewalk, to the bright yellow ball, to the faint little footprints that might be gone forever. And then came a tip that changed everything. A neighbor had seen a man loitering near the edge of the cornfield that bordered the neighborhood. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie, face obscured. He didn't match any description of anyone local. When officers tried to intercept him, he vanished, leaving only disturbed earth and broken corn stalks as his trace. Lane felt a chill. Something about the man's presence was deliberate, predatory. Emma was no longer just missing, she was being hunted. As the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the Ohio cornfields in gold and amber, the search expanded. Volunteers joined, forming human chains, moving through the trees, scanning shadows. Emma's mother sat on the curb, hands clasped, rocking back and forth. Every car that passed made her flinch. Every bark of a dog in the distance made her hold her breath. Detective Lane surveyed the scene, his mind racing. He knew the importance of a lead, of a trail, of a clue that could break the case open. He looked at the woods, dense and foreboding, and whispered, "We need help that sees what we can't." His partner Ortiz nodded, understanding immediately. They were about to call in the K-9 unit, a team of highly trained police dogs known for their ability to find people even when the trail was cold. Even as darkness crept across the fields, Lane refused to leave. The sun setting over the horizon cast long, sinister shadows. Somewhere in those woods, a 3-year-old girl was frightened, her small cries swallowed by the night. And in that moment, Lane made a silent vow. Emma Reynolds would be found, no matter the cost. Ending suspense. Then, just as the first stars appeared in the evening sky, a neighbor shouted from the edge of the cornfield. "Detective, someone's here." Lane's heart skipped. When he ran toward the voice, he found a shadowy figure disappearing into the dense trees, leaving nothing but a broken twig behind, a silent promise that this case was far from over. By the next morning, the relentless Ohio sun beat down on the small town like a spotlight, highlighting every anxious face, every desperate searcher. The streets were lined with patrol cars, police vans, and the occasional concerned neighbor. The air carried the tension of a community on edge, one small girl's disappearance stretching everyone to their emotional limits. Inside the police station, Detective Marcus Lane reviewed the witness reports, piecing together fragments of a trail that seemed to vanish into the shadows. His gut told him the lead in the cornfield was crucial, but the woods were dense, the footprints fading, and time was slipping away like water through fingers. Lane knew what had to happen next. The K-9 unit, known across the state for its skill in finding missing children, was on call. Chief K-9 Officer Sarah McCall arrived shortly after, her face tense but calm, carrying the leash of her veteran tracking dog, Rex. The German shepherd's coat gleamed under the morning sun, eyes alert, muscles taut with anticipation. Rex was no ordinary dog. He was a tracker whose reputation for accuracy was legendary. Lane had seen Rex in action, locating missing hikers, lost pets, and even one missing teenager who had vanished in a storm. But today's task would test both dog and handler in ways no one anticipated. Sarah knelt beside Rex, whispering softly, her fingers brushing his ears. "This is Emma," she said, holding out the little girl's stuffed rabbit worn from love and play. Rex's nose twitched. He sniffed the toy carefully, then locked his amber eyes onto Sarah, almost as if understanding the gravity of the mission. Lane swallowed hard. "She's counting on him," he muttered. "We all are." The team moved quickly, forming search lines along the edge of the woods. Rex led, his nose close to the ground, ears pivoting at every sound. Birds scattered as he passed, leaves rustling under his paws. Every officer, volunteer, and parent in the group fell into a hushed silence, aware that even a whisper could distract the dog from following Emma's scent. Lane's eyes scanned the horizon, noting every darkened crevice, every movement in the tall corn stalks. It wasn't long before Rex stiffened, nose quivering, tail rigid. He barked once, a sharp, commanding sound, and bolted toward the woods. The line of searchers followed as best they could, though the terrain grew rough, the shadows longer, the cornfield stretching into a green maze. Lane's pulse quickened. Each step forward felt like a heartbeat of hope and dread. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, sweat dripping down Lane's back, but Rex never wavered. The dog's instincts were precise, almost supernatural in their intensity. He stopped at a narrow path hidden among the cornstalks, sniffed furiously, then darted forward again. Sarah followed, calling out quietly, "Easy, Rex. Easy. Stay focused." But Rex had already disappeared deeper into the woods, as if propelled by some inner knowledge that no human could comprehend. Then suddenly, Rex froze mid-stride, his hackles rising, nose pointing toward a rusted, abandoned shed partially hidden by overgrown brush. Lane and Sarah exchanged a glance. The shed had been empty when officers scouted it yesterday, but now something felt different. A faint, sweet smell lingered in the air, a scent so delicate Lane recognized it immediately. Shampoo, the kind used on toddlers. Emma had been here, or someone had been. Lane motioned for his team to approach carefully. The shed door creaked as it swung open, revealing a dark, musty interior. Footprints, muddy and irregular, trailed toward the back wall. Lane's stomach churned. Someone had been inside recently, and the evidence was fresh. Sarah patted Rex on the side, whispering, "Good boy, find her." Rex barked once and nudged toward the footprints, guiding Lane to the next piece of the puzzle. As Lane crouched to examine the floor, a twig snapped behind them. Everyone froze. The hairs on the back of Lane's neck stood on end. Shadows moved among the trees, but the figure disappeared before anyone could get a clear look. Lane's mind raced. Who was this person? Was it the abductor returning to the scene, or just a terrified neighbor drawn to the commotion? Either possibility tightened a knot in his chest. By late afternoon, the trail led Rex and the team deeper into the woods, over gnarled roots and through thickets that clawed at their clothing. Lane's wristwatch ticked agonizingly slowly, each second amplifying the fear gnawing at him. Volunteers stumbled and muttered in exhaustion, but Rex pushed forward, the rhythm of his paws against dirt a constant heartbeat of determination. Then, as if guided by instinct alone, Rex suddenly stopped at a patch of disturbed earth beneath a canopy of thick trees. He barked sharply and pawed at the ground, eyes fixed. Lane leaned closer. Here, he thought, could be the break they had been waiting for. The soil was freshly turned, subtle impressions forming a pattern, almost like someone had dragged something, or someone, through the dirt. Lane felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Rex's growl deepened, low and warning. He wasn't barking at the footprints or the dirt, he was reacting to something else, something human. Lane gestured for everyone to step back. Sarah whispered, "Rex, show me." The dog bolted toward a narrow passageway between trees, barking furiously, urging the team to follow. Lane's heart pounded. The woods seemed endless, shadows stretching like fingers, the rustle of leaves masking any sound of movement. Suddenly, Rex stopped at a clearing where sunlight fell in golden squares on the undergrowth. The team froze. There in the middle of the clearing lay a small yellow ball, Emma's ball. Lane's chest tightened. It had to be hers. Every instinct screamed it. Sarah knelt beside Rex, offering him a treat, but he ignored it, ears pricked, tail stiff. The dog had found the trail, and he would not rest until it ended where Emma was. As they advanced cautiously, Lane noticed a small path leading to a faintly visible figure among the trees. The figure moved quickly, almost too fast to follow. Lane's hand hovered over his radio, ready to call it in, but the person vanished into the shadows before anyone could react. The woods returned to its eerie stillness, only the rustling of leaves and distant bird calls breaking the silence. Lane's stomach knotted. Someone had been here, likely the one responsible for Emma's disappearance, and now they had escaped again. The trail was real, Rex had confirmed it, and the threat remained dangerously close. Every officer knew the stakes. One wrong move could make the difference between rescue and tragedy. As night began to settle, the team reluctantly called for a temporary halt. Searchlights cut through the trees, the dogs resting briefly but alert, noses twitching at every breeze. Lane glanced at Rex, lying on the ground but watching intently. The dog's gaze was almost human in its understanding. He knew Emma was out there and he would find her. Ending suspense. Just as the team gathered to regroup, Rex bolted upright and barked toward a shadow shifting between the trees. Lane froze, heart hammering. The figure paused, then vanished again, leaving the team staring into the darkness, realizing with chilling clarity that whoever had taken Emma was still watching them, still out there, and time was running out. The sun rose over rural Ohio like a warning, painting long, slanted beams of gold across the cornfields and woodland edges. Detective Marcus Lane and Officer Kim Ortiz returned to the Reynolds property, their boots crunching on the dusty road, each step heavy with urgency. The previous day's chaos lingered in the air, a tense mixture of fear, sweat, and lingering hope. Volunteers and officers had scoured the woods, but nothing concrete had been found. Everything pointed to the shadowy figure Rex had tracked, yet that person had disappeared as if swallowed by the trees themselves. Lane's jaw clenched. Time was slipping through their fingers. Rex, still alert from the previous day, sniffed the air around the edge of the cornfield. His amber eyes darted from stalk to stalk, nostrils flaring. He pawed at the ground, signaling Lane that he had picked up a fresh scent. Lane knelt beside him, holding a small piece of Emma's clothing, a tiny sock with pink trim, and let Rex smell it. The dog's ears twitched. He barked once, a sharp sound that cut through the morning stillness, and bolted toward the dense woods beyond the cornfield. Lane signaled the officers to follow. The trail led through tangled underbrush and over gnarled roots, the thick canopy of leaves turning sunlight into fractured patterns on the forest floor. Lane's eyes darted constantly, scanning for any sign of the missing girl or her abductor. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and growing panic. Every rustle, every whisper of leaves made the hairs on the back of Lane's neck stand on end. Rex led them to a rusted, abandoned shed partially hidden behind a tangle of vines. Lane recognized it immediately, the same shed from the previous day where fresh footprints had been discovered. But now there was more, small scratches on the door frame and a faint, sweet aroma wafting from inside. Emma's shampoo. Lane felt his stomach tighten. The evidence was growing tangible. The girl had been here recently, or someone had been holding her there. With extreme caution, Lane motioned for the officers to cover the exits while he and Sarah McCall approached the shed. Rex's growl was low, almost human, vibrating with intensity. Lane kicked the door slightly, causing it to creak open. Inside, the shed was dark, dusty, and musty. Broken tools and rotting crates littered the floor, but Lane's eyes locked on a small detail, a tiny footprint smudged in the dirt leading to the back wall. This was a child's trail, unmistakable. Lane felt a surge of hope. They were close. Sarah gestured for Rex to search further. The dog darted forward, sniffing every crevice, every corner until he stopped near a loose floorboard. Pawing at it, Rex growled insistently. Lane lifted the board, revealing something buried beneath, Emma's missing bracelet, engraved with her initials. Lane's heart thudded painfully. This was concrete evidence that she had been in the shed, and more importantly, that she had not been abandoned far away. She was nearby. Before anyone could react, a twig snapped behind them. Lane spun around, gun drawn, heart hammering. Between the trees, a figure moved, tall, cloaked in shadow, retreating quickly. Lane barked orders to the officers, but the person vanished, swallowed by the dense forest. Lane cursed under his breath. Whoever was responsible had been watching them all along, and they were cunning, deliberate. Rex barked once, then bolted in pursuit, weaving through the trees with agility Lane could only envy. The pursuit led them deeper into the forest than they had dared to venture before. Sunlight dimmed as the canopy thickened, leaving the forest in a shadowy half-light. The air smelled of damp moss and decaying leaves, the kind of smell that sticks to your lungs. Lane's mind raced. The kidnapper knew these woods intimately, likely anticipating every move they made. Each step was a gamble. Every rustle could be a threat. Then unexpectedly Rex stopped. His body stiffened, nose twitching, eyes locked on a small clearing ahead. Lane crept forward, heart pounding in his chest, and there she was, Emma, sitting on the ground, her sundress smudged with dirt, clutching a small stuffed rabbit. Her curly hair fell in damp tangles across her forehead. She looked up with wide, frightened eyes, and for a moment time seemed to freeze. The world around Lane, the trees, the rustling leaves, even the figure that had fled moments before, faded away. Emma's eyes darted nervously, scanning the woods behind her. She wasn't crying, but her tiny hands trembled as she clutched her toy. Lane's stomach twisted. She had been alone, terrified for who knew how long. Her survival instincts had kept her quiet, hidden, and alive. Lane stepped closer, careful not to startle her. "Emma," he said softly, "we're here to take you home." But just as hope surged, a sudden noise ripped through the clearing. A low, menacing laugh barely audible coming from the shadows. Lane froze. The kidnapper had returned or never left. Rex's growl deepened, body coiled like a spring, teeth bared. The forest seemed to close in around them, every branch and leaf transformed into a potential threat. Lane's pulse raced. He was outnumbered in experience but not in determination. Emma clutched Rex's leash instinctively, her tiny fingers curling around it. The bond between child and dog was unmistakable, and Lane realized that Rex wasn't just a tracker, he was a protector. The kidnapper's shadow shifted again, then disappeared as suddenly as it appeared. Lane glanced around, but there was nothing. Silence fell over the forest, thick and suffocating. Lane turned his attention back to Emma. She stared at Rex, her face pale, lips trembling. The detective realized then that the child might be able to communicate what she had seen in a way no adult could replicate. But getting her to speak, to relay what she knew, would require delicacy. One wrong move could scare her into silence again. Sarah McCall approached slowly, kneeling beside Emma. "Hey there, little one," she said gently. "You're safe now. Rex is here. Can you show me where you were?" Emma's wide eyes darted toward Rex, then back at the detectives. Lane held his breath. Every second felt like an eternity. And then, in the hush of the forest, Emma did something no one expected. She pointed a tiny finger at the clearing behind them, at the very shadows where the figure had lurked, and whispered two words so clear, so innocent, that the detectives froze. "Ending suspense, him Rex." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Lane's mind raced. The child had just identified her abductor, not with words adults expected, but through her connection with Rex. The forest seemed to shrink around them, every leaf, every shadow, every sound now charged with significance. And in that moment, it became terrifyingly clear. The real investigation was only just beginning, and the next move would be critical. The morning sun broke over downtown Columbus, casting a golden haze over the courthouse steps as reporters, camera crews, and curious onlookers gathered. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation, a tension so palpable it felt almost tangible. The case of 3-year-old Emma Reynolds' disappearance had gripped the nation, and now the trial was about to begin. Media outlets had followed every twist of the story, from the frantic search in the cornfields to the astonishing discovery by Rex, the police dog who had located the missing girl. Everyone wanted to witness history, and the courthouse was electric with expectation. Detective Marcus Lane walked briskly through the corridors, his suit pressed but slightly wrinkled from long hours in the field. Beside him, Officer Sarah McCall held Rex's leash firmly, the dog walking calmly yet alert, aware that the courtroom was unfamiliar territory. Lane's mind raced, going over every detail of the investigation, every step that had led to this day. Every photograph, every piece of evidence, every footprint had been meticulously catalogued, and yet he knew nothing could fully prepare the jury for what Emma would reveal. Emma, small and fragile, clutched her stuffed rabbit as her mother, Leila Reynolds, guided her through the throng of reporters. Her bright eyes darted nervously around the room, catching glimpses of cameras and the harsh glare of courtroom lights. She had been through so much, abducted, lost, terrified, and yet in those moments she displayed a courage beyond her years. Her tiny fingers tightened around the rabbit's soft fabric, the only comfort in a world suddenly full of strangers. The defendant, a man in his late 30s with a cold, angular face, sat stiffly at the defense table. His eyes darted across the courtroom, betraying a mixture of impatience and calculated composure. Detective Lane's gaze locked onto him for a brief moment, registering the subtle tremor in his hands as he smoothed down his tie. Lane knew that beneath that mask, fear had begun to creep in, the first cracks in a facade built on lies. The judge entered, gavel in hand, and the courtroom fell silent immediately, the sound of the gavel echoing like a signal to brace for the drama to come. Emma's father, David Reynolds, sat rigid in his seat, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on his daughter. Every muscle in his body screamed worry, but he had to remain composed for Emma's sake. The prosecutors arranged their files, whispering final instructions, while the defense attorney adjusted his glasses, rehearsing the arguments that would, in his mind, cast doubt. At the front of the courtroom, Rex sat obediently beside Sarah, ears flicking with attention at every sound. Though he was calm, the dog's eyes held intelligence and awareness that seemed almost human. Every officer, every courtroom attendee recognized that this dog was more than a witness. He was an integral part of the investigation, a silent guardian whose instincts had guided them straight to Emma. Lane approached the jury box, speaking quietly with the lead prosecutor. The key is her identification. She's only 3, but she knows him. She knows what happened. The prosecutor nodded, understanding the challenge and the opportunity. It wasn't just about evidence. It was about translating the child's courage and memory into a moment the jury would never forget. Emma was led to the witness stand, her small body dwarfed by the chair and microphone. Her mother held her hand for support, whispering softly, "It's okay, baby, just look at Rex." Emma's gaze shifted to the German shepherd, whose calm presence seemed to infuse her with courage. She inhaled deeply, small chest rising and falling, and focused on the dog who had saved her life. The courtroom hushed, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Cameras clicked, recording every expression, every movement. The defense attorney attempted to project confidence, leaning back in his chair, but even he felt the weight of what was about to unfold. The audience, both inside and through the live broadcast across the country, held their collective breath. Detective Lane signaled Sarah. "Let's see if she's ready." Sarah gave Rex a slight nod and the dog's ears pricked. Emma's tiny fingers curled around the stuffed rabbit. Her eyes met Rex, the unspoken communication between them almost sacred. In that moment, the bond they had formed in the woods seemed to fill the entire courtroom with tension, anticipation, and hope. The prosecutor asked gently, "Emma, can you tell us who was with you in the woods?" Her voice was small, barely above a whisper, yet there was a steeliness in it, an innocence that made every adult in the room lean forward. Emma's lips trembled as she opened her mouth, her small hand still clutching Rex's leash. All eyes in the courtroom were fixed on her. The defense attorney's confident smirk faltered slightly as he realized this was a moment he could not control. Emma's voice, barely audible, reached every corner of the room. "Him, Rex." Silence fell like a heavy curtain. The judge's gavel hovered in midair, witnesses and jurors frozen in disbelief, reporters holding their breath mid-note, cameras blinking in stunned stillness. The simplicity of her words, 2 innocent syllables, carried the weight of truth, danger, and a 3-year-old's unwavering memory. Lane felt a chill run down his spine. Emma had done what adults, investigators, and professionals could not. She had identified the person responsible for her abduction. Rex's tail thumped softly on the floor, a subtle yet powerful affirmation of her words. Even the defendant's composure cracked. His eyes flicked toward the little girl, then away, as color drained from his face. The mask of arrogance was gone, leaving fear, guilt, and desperation visible for the first time. The prosecutor leaned in, whispering to Emma, "Can you show us?" Emma's small hand pointed firmly at the defendant. The courtroom erupted in subtle gasps, whispers, and shocked murmurs. Cameras caught every detail, every reaction, every micro-expression. Every juror knew the trajectory of the trial had shifted irreversibly. Detective Lane's mind raced. Emma's identification was clear, undeniable, but the courtroom was a stage of strategy and tension. The defense would argue, dispute, and attempt to undermine the child's credibility, yet how could anyone dispute what had happened in the woods? What had been seen by a trained police dog and a courageous child? The evidence was about to become irrefutable, and every participant in the courtroom felt it deep in their bones. Sarah patted Rex lightly, whispering, "Good boy, you did it." The dog's ears flicked, eyes unwavering on Emma and the suspect. He had not only located the child but had become the silent witness whose presence transformed fear into clarity. Ending suspense. As Emma remained standing, pointing at the man who had terrorized her, the defendant leaned toward his attorney, whispering urgently, We need to talk now." The words, though barely audible, sent a ripple of tension through the courtroom. Something had shifted, and Lane knew instinctively that the next move by the defendant could change everything. Forever, the courtroom had gone utterly silent. Every eye was fixed on the small figure of Emma Reynolds, barely 3 years old, standing on the witness stand. Her tiny hand was still outstretched, pointing with certainty at the man seated at the defense table. Two words, whispered softly but unmistakably, "Him, Rex." Those words cut through the tension like a thunderclap, leaving a wake of shock and disbelief in the room. Cameras clicked rapidly, reporters scribbled furiously, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Even the judge paused, hand frozen above the gavel, trying to comprehend the scene. Detective Marcus Lane felt a shiver run down his spine. He had seen moments of courage in children before, but never one so raw, so pivotal, so hauntingly clear. Emma's identification was simple, yet devastatingly effective. She had seen her captor, she had recognized him, and she had communicated it through the bond she had forged with Rex, the police dog who had been her silent protector throughout the ordeal. Lane knew this moment could shift the entire trial. Officer Sarah McCall stood beside Rex, holding his leash lightly. The dog's ears flicked, eyes locked on the defendant, tail rigid with tension. Rex had been trained to respond to Emma's scent and voice cues, and now that training was bearing extraordinary fruit. Every movement the dog made reinforced the unspoken truth. The suspect was the person responsible for Emma's disappearance. Even in his hardened demeanor, the defendant's face betrayed a flicker of panic. His jaw tightened, his knuckles whitened against the table, and for the first time he looked almost human, afraid, exposed. The prosecutor leaned toward Emma, speaking in a soft, encouraging tone. "Emma, can you show us who?" The little girl's eyes, wide and unblinking, returned to the man she had identified in the woods. Without hesitation, she extended her hand fully, her tiny fingers unwavering. "Him," she repeated, louder this time. The courtroom's collective tension ratcheted higher. Murmurs rippled through the spectators. Even jurors, seasoned adults trained to remain impartial, felt the weight of the child's innocence and the undeniable clarity of her testimony. The defense attorney attempted to intervene, his voice firm but strained. "Objection. The witness is a minor, incapable of reliable identification. This is inadmissible." The judge held up a hand, silencing him. "I want to hear what she has to say," the judge said, voice low but authoritative. "Proceed carefully." Lane stepped forward, gently placing Emma's stuffed rabbit in her arms and giving a reassuring nod. "Emma, Rex is here. He knows you. Can you tell us more?" Emma's gaze shifted briefly to the dog. She nodded slightly, her small chest rising and falling, a flicker of confidence in her expression. She had been through terror, isolation, and fear, yet now, standing in front of the room full of strangers, she exhibited a courage that stunned everyone. With the courtroom hanging on every word, Emma repeated, "Him, Rex." Then she took a deep breath and added, pointing more insistently at the defendant, "He took me." The room seemed to hold its breath, the silence so complete that it was almost deafening. Gasps echoed softly, some jurors pressed hands to their mouths, and a reporter's pen froze mid-scribble. The clarity of the statement left no room for ambiguity. Rex, obedient but intensely alert, growled softly. His posture was protective, almost human in its intensity. He shifted slightly toward Emma, ensuring the connection between them remained visible, undeniable. Sarah McCall patted him lightly. "Good boy," she whispered. "She's telling the truth." The defense attorney's face paled. He leaned forward, whispering frantically to the defendant, but Lane could see the tension radiating off them. The strategy that had seemed so solid now crumbled under the weight of a 3-year-old's testimony and a police dog's instincts. The room held its collective breath as everyone realized the trial's momentum had shifted irreversibly. The prosecutor, seizing the moment, began laying out the evidence. "Ladies and gentlemen, the witness has identified the defendant. The child was found in close proximity to him, and this identification was corroborated by trained law enforcement tracking and the instincts of a police dog. This is not hearsay or conjecture. This is a child, a survivor, pointing directly at the person who harmed her. Each word resonated through the courtroom, reverberating against the walls, echoing in the minds of everyone present. Lane's eyes never left Emma. He marveled at the precision of her memory, her instinctive understanding of danger, and her reliance on Rex. The partnership between them had been forged in fear and necessity, and now it was on full display for the world to witness. Every juror, every spectator, every officer present understood it. This was extraordinary. The defendant shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His face went pale, lips trembling slightly, and he avoided the gaze of the jury. Lane could see the subtle telltale signs of panic: shaking hands, darting eyes, shallow breaths. He knew then that the child's words had struck the nerve of truth, piercing through years of calculated deception. The courtroom was no longer a neutral stage. It had become a crucible of judgment, morality, and justice. Sarah McCall leaned down to Rex, whispering, "Good job, boy, she's safe now." Rex's ears flicked back, tail stiff, eyes scanning the courtroom for any sign of danger. Even in the controlled chaos of a courtroom, the dog's vigilance never wavered. Lane realized that in a room filled with human uncertainty, a dog's instincts could carry clarity and conviction that no testimony or evidence could replicate. The atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. Reporters clicked cameras and scribbled notes frantically. The media coverage outside was already viral. The nation would soon witness a 3-year-old girl's bravery and the extraordinary role of a police dog in bringing a dangerous criminal to justice. Lane felt a wave of both pride and exhaustion. The emotional weight of the past days, the trauma Emma had endured, and the potential for justice all collided in one moment. The judge finally leaned forward, eyes sharp, voice measured. "Counselors, this testimony is unprecedented, but it will be entered into the record. Let the jury consider it with the weight it deserves." Every person in the room understood the gravity of that statement. The child had spoken, the dog had confirmed, and the evidence was irrefutable. The tide of the trial had turned, and there was no turning back. Ending suspense. As Emma sat back down, clutching her stuffed rabbit and glancing at Rex, the defendant leaned urgently toward his lawyer. We need to tell the truth or she'll." His words hung unfinished, a fragile thread of threat and desperation. Lane's heart pounded. The man had realized finally that the child's innocence, her bond with the dog, and the evidence surrounding them were more powerful than any defense could counter. What he would do next could determine whether justice was served, or if darkness still lingered. The courthouse buzzed with anticipation, but Detective Marcus Lane and Officer Sarah McCall knew the real work was happening outside. The evidence gathered so far had shifted the trial dramatically, but something inside Lane told him the case was far from complete. The abductor had been cunning, leaving just enough trace to lead investigators but not enough to guarantee conviction. They needed more, physical proof that would leave no room for doubt. Lane, Sarah, and Rex returned to the woods where Emma had been found. The summer heat pressed down on them, beads of sweat trickling along Lane's temple. Rex moved confidently ahead, scanning the ground, nose twitching, tail stiff. He had already proven his instinct and intelligence were extraordinary. Now they relied on him to uncover the final pieces of the puzzle. Lane adjusted his gloves and whispered, "Find it, Rex. Find the rest." Rex darted into the underbrush, pausing to sniff at a small mound of disturbed earth near the back of the shed where Emma had been hiding. He pawed at it vigorously, growling low in his throat. Lane bent down to examine the area, seeing a faint outline in the dirt, an impression of something buried. "Good boy," he murmured, brushing dirt aside carefully. The ground beneath shifted slightly, revealing a small, dirt-caked box. Lane's heart tightened. It could hold the key to corroborating Emma's identification of the suspect. Sarah knelt beside Rex, brushing dirt from the dog's paws. "He knows, Marcus. He's sure." Lane opened the box, revealing a collection of Emma's personal items, a tiny hairbrush, a ribbon, and most importantly, her missing bracelet with her initials engraved. The sight of it sent a surge of relief and determination through Lane. This tangible evidence proved that Emma had been in the abductor's possession, and that the man in the courtroom had been lying. Lane called the forensics team to the scene. They documented every item meticulously, photographing, cataloging, and packaging it. Sarah kept Rex at heel, but he remained intensely focused on the area, sensing perhaps that danger wasn't entirely gone. Lane noticed the faint scuff marks on the shed floor, traces of where someone had dragged or manipulated the boxes. Every detail mattered. Every mark told a story of panic, struggle, and concealment. Just as they were about to leave, Rex's ears twitched. He growled low, hackles raised, staring at the corner of the shed. Lane froze, glancing where the dog was fixated. Behind some old, rotting crates, a small gap revealed a faint shimmer of metal. Lane approached cautiously, sliding a crate aside. Hidden beneath was a small, locked trunk. Lane's pulse quickened. The abductor had been methodical, hiding the most incriminating evidence from plain sight. Rex barked sharply, signaling the importance of the find. Lane pried open the trunk to reveal a disturbing collection: clothing belonging to Emma, small personal toys, and a partially filled journal. The journal contained crude, obsessive notes detailing movements and plans. Each page was a damning record of intent, a psychological map of the abductor's manipulations. Lane felt a chill run down his spine. This was the evidence that would not just convict but reveal the sinister mind behind the crime. Sarah carefully photographed everything, her hands steady but her heart racing. Rex stood nearby, vigilant, ears flicking at every sound. It was clear to all present that the dog understood the significance of the discovery. He wasn't just a witness. He was an active participant in bringing justice to a child who had endured unspeakable fear. Lane reflected on the past week. The panic, the search, the moment Emma had spoken her 2 words. None of it would have led to this moment, without the dog's instinct and her bravery. Lane felt a tap on his shoulder. One of the officers whispered, "Detective, we need to get this to the lab immediately. DNA testing, fingerprints, it'll tie everything together." Lane nodded, carefully transferring the evidence into sealed containers. Each piece of Emma's belongings, each note from the journal, and even the traces of soil were now tangible proof. Every item was a brick in the wall of justice they were building. The team returned to the courthouse with the evidence, the summer sun casting long shadows across the steps. Inside, the atmosphere had grown more tense with every passing hour. Jurors whispered quietly, the press murmured, and the defendant fidgeted nervously at the defense table. The presence of Rex beside Sarah served as a living reminder of the search that had led to these revelations. The dog had located the child, found the hidden evidence, and now stood as an unspoken witness to the truth. Lane watched as the prosecution introduced the newly found items to the jury. Emma's bracelet, her toys, the notes from the journal, all cataloged and presented meticulously. Lane could see the jurors' expressions shift, their focus sharpening. Each item reinforced the child's testimony, strengthening the chain of evidence that pointed unambiguously to the defendant. The courtroom felt electric, the weight of reality pressing on everyone present. The defense attorney tried to challenge the evidence, questioning chain of custody and relevance, but the photographs, field notes, and Rex's verified tracking reports left him grasping at straws. Lane noticed the defendant's panic growing, tiny tremors in his hands, a strained flush creeping up his neck, his eyes flicking repeatedly toward the tiny witness who had unraveled so much with just 2 words. Rex, though obedient, remained a silent sentinel beside Emma. He had saved her, led the team to critical hidden evidence, and ensured that the narrative of truth would prevail. The room seemed to recognize it instinctively. No one could deny the extraordinary role he had played. The dog's instincts were as pivotal as the child's courage. Ending suspense. As the courtroom prepared to resume, Rex suddenly growled low, staring at a dark corner near the defense table. Every eye turned instinctively. The defendant shifted, glancing nervously at the dog. Lane's pulse surged. Rex's alertness suggested that even in this controlled environment, a new revelation was imminent. Something had not yet surfaced, a final thread connecting the abductor to his crime, waiting to emerge, and the courtroom braced, collectively holding its breath for what was coming next. The courtroom was suffused with a tense stillness, the kind of silence that precedes a storm. Detective Marcus Lane sat at the edge of the prosecution's table, eyes locked on the defendant. He could feel the man's anxiety radiating in waves, small tremors in his fingers, shallow breaths, and the occasional flicker of guilt in his otherwise carefully controlled expression. Across the room, the jury watched intently, notebooks open, eyes wide. Cameras flashed intermittently, recording every subtle movement, every gasp, every reaction for the nation that had followed the case with rapt attention. Emma Reynolds sat in her witness chair, small hands gripping her stuffed rabbit tightly. Her wide, amber eyes were fixed on Rex, who sat beside Officer Sarah McCall with perfect, disciplined posture. The dog's alert ears twitched with every subtle sound, and his amber gaze never wavered from the suspect. Even in a room filled with adults, their collective fear, tension, and anticipation, the bond between child and dog created a gravitational pull, a quiet command that everyone in the courtroom instinctively acknowledged. Detective Lane rose, motioning to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you are about to witness is unprecedented. This child, with the guidance of a trained police dog, has identified the person responsible for her abduction. We are not relying on conjecture. We are relying on evidence, observation, and instinct, the very instincts that saved her life." Lane's voice was steady, authoritative, but beneath it carried the raw urgency of a man who had seen the terror Emma endured firsthand. The prosecutor handed Emma a small pointer stick, explaining gently, "Emma, we need your help. Can you show us who took you?" Emma's fingers tightened around her rabbit before she extended the pointer, aiming it directly at the defendant. "Him," she said firmly, her tiny voice resonating with unwavering certainty. The courtroom seemed to shudder. Gasps rippled through the audience. The media cameras captured every reaction. Stunned jurors, slack-jawed reporters, and a defendant whose eyes betrayed a flash of panic and dread. Rex growled softly, a low rumble that reverberated in the room. The dog's body was taut, his senses attuned to every movement, every vibration in the floor, every shift in the defendant's breathing. Sarah McCall whispered, "Stay calm, Rex. You're safe." But even her words could not dampen the palpable tension. The bond between Emma and Rex had not just identified the abductor, it had transformed the courtroom into a space charged with undeniable truth. The defense attorney scrambled, attempting to intervene. "Objection! The witness is a minor. This identification is unreliable, subject to suggestion." The judge held up a hand, silencing him. "The jury will consider the witness's age and the circumstances, but testimony will continue." Every word hung heavy in the room, the weight of justice pressing down. Lane stepped forward, holding the small box containing Emma's recovered belongings. He opened it, revealing her bracelet, toys, and the journal from the shed. Each item had been meticulously documented by forensics, every fingerprint and trace of DNA accounted for. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lane said, "this is the evidence of a child's ordeal. Every item corroborates what Emma has just told us. Every mark, every scuff, every note points to the defendant. The truth cannot be denied." The defendant's face went pale. His confident, composed demeanor was cracking under the combined weight of Emma's testimony, Rex's presence, and the physical evidence before the jury. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering in a panicked tone, but the words were lost to the tense hum of the courtroom. Lane noticed subtle gestures, clenched fists, rapid blinking, shallow breaths. The defendant was unraveling. Emma, sensing the eyes on her, looked back at Rex. The dog wagged his tail slightly, a small but deliberate reassurance. She inhaled deeply, summoned courage, and repeated, "Him took me." The words were precise, haunting in their simplicity. Every adult in the room felt the weight of those syllables. Even the most skeptical juror could not dismiss the raw, unfiltered truth coming from a frightened child who had survived. The prosecutor seized the moment. This is more than testimony. This is a child's instinct, guided by a trained police dog. This is tangible proof supported by forensic evidence. The defendant had access, the opportunity, and now irrefutable identification. Ladies and gentlemen, the path to justice is clear. Lane's eyes scanned the jury box, noting each juror's reactions, the widening eyes, subtle nods, and intense focus on Emma. The tide had turned irreversibly. Rex suddenly stiffened, ears pricked, tail rigid. Lane froze, sensing something had shifted. The defendant, noticing the dog's alertness, turned slightly in panic. Rex growled low, stepping forward, eyes locked on the man. The dog's instincts were sharp, instinctively reacting to the fear, guilt, and tension emanating from the abductor. Sarah whispered urgently, "Stay steady, Rex. Protect the child." The courtroom held its breath as a silent battle of wills played out between dog and man. The defense attorney tried to regain control, questioning the credibility of a child and an animal witness, but the combination of Emma's vivid identification, her emotional state, and the dog's undeniable instincts left him floundering. Lane felt a surge of both relief and anticipation. The scales of justice were tipping in their favor. Every piece of evidence, every trace of doubt, was being systematically dismantled by the simplest, most powerful of truths. A child and a dog knew what had happened. The judge leaned forward, voice calm but commanding. "The jury has witnessed the testimony and the presentation of evidence. You may consider all elements in your deliberation. This case involves extraordinary circumstances, but the law applies fully." Lane felt the tension in the room ratchet even higher. The verdict, though not yet spoken, was on the horizon. Every subtle movement, every heartbeat, and every whisper of air seemed magnified in anticipation. Ending suspense. Just as the court recessed for jury deliberation, Rex let out a single, sharp bark toward the defendant, who flinched visibly. Emma's small hand instinctively reached for the dog, holding tight. Lane's pulse raced. That bark was more than instinct. It was confirmation, a silent signal that justice was within reach. But the defendant's reaction suggested he still had one last move, one desperate attempt that could threaten everything. The courtroom waited, tense and breathless, for the final revelation that would determine Emma's fate and the trial's outcome. The courtroom was thick with tension, every eye fixed on the jury box as the judge prepared to call them back in. Hours had passed since Emma's testimony, hours of silent deliberation that stretched into a weighty eternity. Detective Marcus Lane sat at the prosecution's table, fingers steepled, heart pounding. Beside him, Officer Sarah McCall stroked Rex's neck, whispering soft encouragements to the dog who had become far more than a tracker. He was a guardian, a witness, and a bridge to the truth. The child who had spoken 2 words that changed everything now sat clutching her stuffed rabbit, unaware of how her courage had gripped an entire courtroom. The defendant shifted nervously in his seat, hands wringing, eyes darting to the door and back to the jury. His composure, already fragile from Emma's identification and the recovered evidence, was now paper-thin. Lane could see the tremor in his fingers, the shallow breaths, the barely restrained panic. The man's facade of control was gone, replaced by a raw, palpable fear that mirrored the child's ordeal. Rex's low growl vibrated in the room, a quiet but unmistakable signal of vigilance, as though he, too, sensed the final act was near. The judge rapped the gavel, and the courtroom fell into a hush so deep it seemed to swallow every sound. The jurors filed forward, their faces solemn, notebooks clutched, eyes shadowed with the weight of responsibility. Lane's stomach tightened. Every second felt like a lifetime as the foreperson rose, clearing her throat. She held the folded slip of paper that contained the fate of the man who had terrorized a child and shaken a community. "We, the jury," the foreperson began, voice steady but heavy, "find the defendant." The words hung in the air like a pendulum, swinging between relief and dread. Emma's small fingers gripped her rabbit tighter, eyes wide and unblinking. Rex, sensing the gravity of the moment, shifted slightly forward, ears pricked, muscles tense. Every person in the courtroom leaned forward, the collective heartbeat of the room synchronized in anticipation. Guilty on all counts. The words hit like a thunderclap. Gasps, murmurs, and shouts of disbelief erupted. Some reporters dropped their pens, cameras flashed furiously, and the defendant sank into his chair, his face drained of color. Lane felt a surge of relief and vindication. Justice had prevailed. The child's courage, the dog's instincts, and the painstaking investigation had combined to deliver the truth. The courtroom, so long filled with tension and fear, now exhaled collectively. Emma's mother, Leila Reynolds, rose from her seat, tears streaming down her face. She rushed to her daughter, enveloping her in a hug that seemed to contain every ounce of love, relief, and exhaustion she had felt over the past days. Emma clung to her mother and her rabbit, glancing briefly at Rex, whose steady presence had been a constant comfort. The dog's amber eyes met hers, and in that simple gaze, the unspoken bond between them resonated. A shared victory, a mutual understanding of survival and protection. Detective Lane approached Emma carefully, kneeling to meet her small gaze. "You did it, kiddo," he said softly. "You were brave, you helped us all, you saved yourself." Emma's lips curled into a tiny, exhausted smile, and she whispered, "Rex helped." Lane nodded, his chest tight with emotion. The dog had done more than find her. He had given her the courage to speak, to identify her abductor, and to help bring him to justice. The defendant was led away in handcuffs, his expression a mixture of shock, fear, and disbelief. Lane observed the way he avoided eye contact, avoided Emma, as if acknowledging that his control had been irrevocably lost. Every movement was a testament to the power of truth and justice prevailing over deception and fear. Outside the courtroom, officers and detectives exchanged quiet congratulations, acknowledging Rex's extraordinary role. The dog had been the invisible thread connecting the investigation, the search, and the trial, a bridge between trauma and justice. As the Reynolds family emerged from the courthouse, reporters clamored for comments. Lane, Leila, and Emma stepped aside, allowing Rex to move freely. Children pointed at the dog in awe, adults whispered in admiration. For them, Rex was no longer merely a police dog, he was a hero. Emma knelt briefly to hug him, pressing her face into his fur. Rex remained still, allowing the tiny human to express her gratitude. In those moments, Lane realized that justice was not just the verdict. It was the courage, compassion, and partnership that had made it possible. Later at the local news station, footage of Emma's testimony went viral. Social media erupted, the nation captivated by the child's bravery and the dog's instinctive heroism. Comments poured in, awe, admiration, and disbelief. People shared the story as a reminder that courage comes in all forms, sometimes from the smallest voices and the keenest instincts. Lane watched the coverage, a quiet satisfaction settling over him. Justice had been served, and it had been achieved through empathy, intelligence, and unwavering determination. Back at the police station, Sarah McCall knelt beside Rex, scratching behind his ears. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Rex sat quietly, eyes gleaming as if he understood the enormity of the day's events. Lane walked by, placing a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "He saved her," Lane said simply. "And he saved all of us from doubt, from fear. He reminded everyone what it means to be brave." Emma, finally resting at home with her family, held her rabbit tightly. The trauma of her ordeal was still present, but it had been tempered by triumph and safety. She glanced at Rex's photo, recently shared in the media, and whispered softly, "Thank you, Rex." The dog, though miles away, had imprinted on her heart permanently, a hero in fur, paws, and instinct. The courthouse steps emptied, the city returned to its rhythm, but the story remained etched in the memories of everyone involved. The trial had ended, the guilty convicted, and the child safe. Yet the tale of bravery, instinct, and the bond between human and dog would resonate far beyond the courtroom, a testament to courage, trust, and the extraordinary ways life can surprise us. Final suspense and emotional closure. As night fell over Columbus, Lane lingered at the station, watching Rex rest in his kennel. His mind returned to Emma's 2 words, the simple, powerful utterance that had changed everything. Lane knew that the world was filled with danger, injustice, and darkness, but sometimes the smallest voices and the sharpest instincts could illuminate the truth in ways no adult or law could. And in that quiet, he whispered to Rex, "Good work, partner. Today you were more than a dog, you were justice." Rex's amber eyes met his, glowing with unspoken understanding, and Lane smiled. The story had ended, but the bond between hero and child, dog and detective, would never be forgotten.